it's kind of not surprising that everyone then is just so overwhelmed with what's going on, which is why I thought it would be a great opportunity for us to kind of regroup. And so welcome everybody for our LinkedIn Live today. Peter and I are going to have a conversation around all things AI. And in fact, Peter is way more up to speed than I am. So we're going to be hearing a lot from Peter more than from me. So really what we've seen in the last 6 months or so is AI and generative AI in all its forms coming out. And we've had ChatGPT 4.0, Apple recently teaming up with ChatGPT for Apple Intelligence, although apparently it's not being rolled out here in Australia till next year sometime. We've got other platforms like Gemini and Jasper, and I've been having a particularly fun time with Perplexity. And I guess what perplexes me is, why would you call something Perplexity? But then anyway, we'll get to that later. And one of the things that I certainly wanted to cover off today was the area, and we won't spend too much time on it, but around the whole issue of free versions of things versus paid versions, and really this whole issue in terms of books and self-publishing, and what the companies are doing in terms of scraping IP and copyright protection. Won't spend a lot of time on that, but certainly the thing around that for me is around ebooks. Should you do ebooks? What concerns are there around that in terms of these companies scraping all of your IP and the dangers around that? And then we're going to have a bit of a deep dive with Peter through actually how to really leverage the AI prompts and how to do that in a smart way in terms of writing and titles and all sorts of things about that around writing. So that's what we're going to cover today. If you have any questions, please type them in, and Peter would love to actually respond to those as and when he's going through things. So don't save them up, and they'll come on the bottom of the screen, and in between Peter running through his slides and me butting in every now and then, he will answer your questions as we go through. So Peter, thanks again so much for coming on board, and I'd love to just kind of get started with your presentation and insights.
Sure, thanks, Jackie. There's only a dozen slides, so mostly pictorial, but I've got a lot of answers which we've made available for after the event. So we'll talk about some of the prompts and the sort of things that people might want to know how to do, and give examples of those. So Donna, can you put up the slide, please? First slide. So one of the things that Jackie and I discussed last time was all the good things about AI. There's lots of negative stuff, but there's also lots of good stuff. So I want to focus today on the things that you want to take out of this as positive. There are always going to be questions around ethics, screen scraping, all those sorts of things. But I wanted to focus on the things that are positive. So one of the big changes since we spoke and since we published the book in December last year was the quality of the images generated by AI, in this case, ChatGPT 4.0. So you see at the bottom of this screen, 2 days ago, I generated this image, and I wanted this to be a version of the thinker. And the thinker represents us as humans, saying, what are we doing with AI? What's the purpose of how we would use AI? So if you can go to the next slide, please, Donna. AI doesn't know everything. I think that's one of the key things, that people think, I should just be able to ask it this question and get an answer. I won't go to all the details, but if you, for example, said, tell me about the World Cup, AI is going to say, I'll give you some information that I know about the World Cup. But if you go and look, there are hundreds of different World Cups: soccer, rugby, cricket, hockey, any number of them. There's a darts World Cup, for example. So you've got to be clear about the way that you ask a question. So the focus here is you ask a series of questions. One prompt isn't going to get you the answer that you need. You've got to be able to say, based on that answer, I might ask a follow-up question. And one of the things that Perplexity, which Jackie referred to a moment ago, does, it gives you a second or a third question. So you'll ask it a question, it will give you an answer, and it'll say, based on that, maybe the next question you want to ask is this. And so I've done a presentation, not for this event, but where I created that series of prompts in Perplexity, and it basically then gives you a publishable document of that entire thing. It's like creating a little book, if you like. So the next slide, please, Debbie, Donna. So it does no more than you think. And again, you've got to look at why it's answered in a particular way. Again, if you say, tell me this, it will tell you that based on what it knows. Now, the real changes over the last 18 months in particular, when ChatGPT first came out, it was based on a training model where the data was up to and including September 2021. So any of the things that you had recorded up to that date, it could answer. Anything post that date, you couldn't get an answer because it didn't go and look any further than that. What it then did was, over the last 6 months in particular, most of these AI tools, ChatGPT, Bard or Gemini, whatever you want to call it, they will now go and search the web as well. So they go through curated sources like Reddit, Wikipedia, any of those sorts of things, and they give you a much more detailed answer about what that is. Now, there's a question on the screen here. What are the risks, in my opinion, of using unapproved tools like LinkedIn, like Datascopers, for example? I can't afford to lose access to my LinkedIn profile. Is it worth the risk? So I think, again, this is one of these Chicken Little things, and we'll talk about that a little more. There is an inherent risk in anything that you publish online. If you promote your own website, if you promote your own blogs, that's then publicly available. We'll get to this question about this in the context of writing a book, an ebook later on. But everything that you publish that's in the public domain is, in my view, fair game. If you've got a LinkedIn profile that you want people to look at, unless you restrict that profile, anybody who can see you on LinkedIn can see that information. That's no different to anybody saying, here's my website, I want to promote what I do, but I don't want anybody to look at it and take that information. It's my intellectual property. So there's this, I guess, challenge between what do you want to make public and what do you need to make public. And so the challenge is always going to be, it's your choice. You do have a choice, and we get to this when we talk about ebooks. You can choose what you let people see. So that's one of the key things. Can I have the next slide, please, Donna?
Peter, just before you go on from that, I think part of that question also, perhaps, Gina, was using content that you've generated through ChatGPT or Perplexity and copying and pasting it. And is that your content? And if you haven't checked it, or if it's plagiarized something else. So you've got all these tools that are apparently great content machines, and some people just copy and paste blindly. I mean, my view is that you should never do that. But I think part of that question also was, if you're going to be using these tools to generate content, you cannot and should not just copy and paste them. You have to take ownership of actually interpreting the content that these platforms provide you, in my view.
Absolutely agree. And I think this is one of the big questions around the ethics of AI. And more is being done in that area in terms of governance. But for example, when I published my book, I used AI to do a lot of the research. when I took that content and I edited it, I put that back through a plagiarism checker. I used Grammarly, and it came back with 0. In other words, the content that was created by ChatGPT for me to use as the stuff that I was going to edit to put into the book came back as there was no plagiarism. Now, I could have said, I've taken this literally from ChatGPT, put it in the book, and would anybody have known that that was a ChatGPT answer versus my words? Part of this, again, is what's your level of trust? So who do you trust to give you answers? And I think one of the key things that's important to me is over the last 6 months in particular, more and more of the response from any AI tool, not just ChatGPT, is showing you the source of where it got that information. So it's not just ChatGPT made this up based on what it knew at the time. It's gone and provided information. So in the PDF version of this presentation, which has got the answers to all these questions I'm going to ask, it shows you where it got that information from. It doesn't just say, here's an answer, believe it or not. Right? So one of the first things that when Jackie and I started talking about this was the premise of don't ebook. You know, you're going to lose your intellectual property. So if I can have the next slide, please, Donna. So if you say don't ebook, the real question is, if I publish my work as an ebook, am I going to lose or diminish the value of my intellectual property? That's really the question. And so I've got a whole answer to this, which we won't go through here, but there are now ways that you protect that. So for example, your digital rights management, if you publish an ebook and it's got a cost against that being downloadable, the ethics of the search engine says, I can't use that because that's already intellectual property. So edit this chapter. So here's another question from Catherine. If I use AI, for example, to simply say, edit this chapter, you need to declare it in the book. What plagiarism checks do you use, please? So there are a number of them you can use. I use Grammarly, and you can use Turnitin, any things that universities choose. When you edit a content that you've been given from ChatGPT, have you made it more or less believable? So what is the value of your editing in this process? So when somebody buys a book, and Jackie's more experienced with this, when somebody buys a book from an author, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, scientific, whatever, they'll look at the credibility of the author. Now, I read quite a lot of novels. My wife and I are avid readers. I wouldn't know whether that storyline was produced by ChatGPT or any other AI tool. The question for me is the story interesting? Do I find it believable? So when I published the book, I edited that content. I refer in the book to the fact that I used ChatGPT. So the whole purpose of the book was, I'm going to use ChatGPT to write a book about using ChatGPT to write a book. And I edited that content, but I then deliberately ran it through that plagiarism checker to say, has any of this information been taken from anywhere else, whether it was published material up to the end of September 21, whether it was stuff from the web that I'd added or edited? And the answer came back 0. It's like producing a paper for a university assignment. If you put that through Turnitin, it will come back with a plagiarism score. Now, there are common phrases which will often appear. It doesn't mean that you have plagiarized the content. It means that that phrase, those 4 or 5 words, are used commonly, but it says this is an indication of potential plagiarism. But the references... Go on.
Sorry, and Peter, and I think perhaps another angle for Catherine's question was, if you've written something and then you put it into ChatGPT and ask it to edit it.
Yes.
You know, and personally, I wouldn't do that. But I guess some people will be drafting content and then popping it into ChatGPT to ask it to say, can you divide this up into subsections? Can you review it? How would you rewrite this sort of thing? So almost using it as an online editing tool in a way.
So I think that the key point here is that almost every tool you use today will offer you an AI rendition of what you've written. If you use PowerPoint, it will give you an AI, oh, you could rewrite it this way. If you write an email, oh, here's Copilot, it will say, you could rewrite this better this way. If you write a document, it will say, I can rewrite it this way. I use Grammarly, for example. So when I'm writing a Word document, Grammarly sits in the background and says, your tone could be improved if you wrote it this way. Do you want a positive tone? Do you want a friendly tone? What sort of thing do you want? So even when you ask ChatGPT to take content that you've written, what you're really saying is, could you write it better than me given the context of my question? So again, you don't just say, here's a paragraph that I've written and I want you to edit it. It's, I want you to change the tone of this. I want you to make it more positive, or I want you to make it. So these are all suggestions for you. Do you use them? That's really up to you. Now, if you're handwriting, I have never done this, but if you're handwriting a manuscript, for example, how many times do you re-handwrite that to get the tone and I guess emphasis that you want? So this is part of the productivity, that you're rewriting this stuff. You may do it many times. It will sound the same. And this is the question that Jean has written here. Isn't there a risk if you rewrite the stuff that it'll start sounding the same? Again, as a human, you are the one who's going to make the decision about the sameness of this. Now, here's the kicker. You can use ChatGPT or any other AI tool to say, of all of these things that I've written here, if they sound too similar, can you suggest how I might change it? Now, again, I did that in the first draft of my book, which Jackie saw. And all three of my reviewers, including Jackie, said there's a bit of a sameness about this. And so when I did the second draft, it was, well, I didn't want that to be repeated. I actually asked the question, have I repeated the same themes here too often? Should I remove them, change them around? So again, this is not saying go and use AI to do this for you. It's saying use AI as a productivity way to improve the way that you think and write, and do it more quickly than you would have done it manually in your own head. So in my case, I don't think that it does diminish your intellectual value. You do have to be prepared to say, I'm going to treat this as my material. I'm going to put a cost on it. And if you've got digital rights management in place, which I do, for example, with the Amazon stuff that I've written, that can't be scraped, right? So there are rules around what can and can't be scraped. It's not anything that's published can be scraped. So an ebook just doesn't mean that it can be taken. If I put stuff on my website, it can be taken. The question is, what's the value of anything on my website? It's not going to be attributed to me personally. It's going to be attributed to the building up of knowledge and content. I might write a particularly good blog post about AI, and that may feed the data warehouse of, here's some more information about AI that might be useful to other people when they're looking for that content. Can I have the next slide, please, Donna? So the key here is it's all about the prompt. And this was the premise of the book. It's really about how you ask the question to get the answer that you want. So we can have another look at how you might do this. Next slide, please, Donna. So here's one. If I want to write a book, doesn't matter what, can you outline the 10 most important things I need to know about the structure and format and style? Now, I had written a book previously in 2005. It was a university textbook. I co-authored that with another university lecturer. The topic was about the practical ways to design a system. We both had a lot of experience in that. We knew what the structure and the evolution had to be because it was a textbook for third-year university students studying business design and technology. But when I started to write the book about AI, I didn't really know what I wanted that structure to be. So I asked the question, and I got several different responses based on what do you want it to look like? You want it to be informative, scientific, whatever it's going to be. Is it going to be friendly? Is it going to be professional? What sort of things do you want? So again, I'm not going to go through the answer in detail here, but in the PDF version of this presentation, we've published that answer. So people who want to get a copy of that, we can provide that for you. But it's about a first-time author, for example. They can speak to someone like Jackie and say, this is what I want to write about. These are the things that are of interest to me. This is my level of knowledge. Where would I start? So this is Jackie's bread and butter, right? This is what she does. I went to Jackie
and my head's not plugged into ChatGPT yet.
No, but I asked Jackie for help when I went to write this book. It wasn't just, here's ChatGPT, I'll write the book using that. So I got a lot of practical advice from Jackie, which allowed me to then tailor what I wanted to say and write in the book itself. So the same thing, it's what I'm saying here. You give it a prompt, and then if I gave it just this prompt on its own, it would give me some answers, which are in the PDF version of this discussion. But you might then say, well, I really didn't understand how I would do that bit properly. Can you give me some more information about the format or the style or the structure, and just pick each one of those pieces separately? You could limit it by saying, where I said, give me the 10 most important things, you could have said, okay, so of those 10 things, give me the 2 most important things about structure. Give me the 2 most important things about format. What style do you think I should take? And you ask it questions. So the whole value proposition here is that you're asking questions from a great set of resources to give you ideas. It's not telling you do that. It's saying here are several things that you could do based on the question you've asked. So in my case, what are the 10 most important things I need to do? And again, you'll see in the summary of that.
Peter, one of the things that you taught me very early on that I'm forever grateful about is actually providing context before you ask the question. You might be coming to this, but for me, that was a real light bulb moment, that in fact you spend a bit of time explaining who your target audience is, what you think the concepts might be, how long you think it might want to be, your thoughts around the topic, to kind of situate it so that you get a more nuanced response.
Yes. So the context is very important to ChatGPT and any AI tool. If you simply say, I mentioned the example, tell me about the World Cup. The context there would have been, if you and I had spoken and you knew that we'd had a conversation previously, and I had talked to you about my interest in the Soccer World Cup in Australia for the Women's World Cup, you would have said, oh, I know what Peter's talking about. I can give him some answers. But if you were ChatGPT or another AI tool, we wouldn't have had that conversation. It's not in my profile. There's nothing there that says, Peter's interested in information about the Women's World Cup held in Australia. About 9 months ago, a former colleague of mine was highly critical of ChatGPT, he said, because he asked it a question about the World Cup. And that was his question. Tell me about the World Cup. And he got this answer from ChatGPT, which was gobbledygook, to be honest. And I picked him up on it and I said, what you really wanted to ask was, tell me about the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup being played in France in 2023. In other words, the context was, I've narrowed it down to an event in a location and in a particular sport. And all of a sudden, the answer he got back was, here are the results, and these are the teams that are leading, and this is the team who's going to be knocked out. So that context was really important. The other thing you can do, again, in ChatGPT and any of the AI tools, you can create your own, I guess, your own context. So in ChatGPT, you've got two ways of doing this. The first is you can tell it about you, who you are, and what you want. You then tell it about how you want ChatGPT to answer you. So in my case, prior to this, when I was coaching, for example, it would come up and say, here's the answer, coach. This is what the particular question referred to, and this is what you might choose to do with it. So in ChatGPT, you get 1,500 characters, I think, for each of those, I guess, ways of defining how you want to ChatGPT to view how you're going to answer a question. As I added more and more to it, it became harder to refine that. So I used ChatGPT to rewrite those two sections. And from 1,500 characters, which I was pushing the barriers of, it rewrote those more succinctly and got them down to about 600 characters, which meant that I still had another 900 characters to improve the context of what I was after and who I am. So this is where you get the benefits out of using tools like ChatGPT. Any AI tool. I was playing with Perplexity. I was playing with a couple of presentation tools, one of which was called Gamma. And it not only generated a presentation, but it generated a website and allowed me to publish that, where most of the other PowerPoint tools just say, I've got 100 different templates and I'll let you put in a prompt and you can tell me whether you think this text looks right, and then I'll generate the rest for you. So you've still got to, again, as Jackie, you pointed out, you've still got to take your own agency in this. You've got to be prepared to look at all the material and say, does that still ring true for me? Is that believable? And again, when anybody looks at the answers to the questions I've posed here, they take time to read. It's not like a two-line answer. So I think there are 15 other slides of pretty much 5 slides each for each of these prompts that give you the answer that ChatGPT 4.0 gave me in these cases. So you can use it however you want, but you are still responsible for making the decision about how you use that information once it's been given to you. The next slide, please, Donna. So again, it's about the prompt. So here's another example. This might help you learn how to use an AI tool to help you craft your book. And I'll use the word craft rather than write. Next slide, please, Donna. Can you give me a positive view about AI and how we shouldn't think of it in terms of the Chicken Little anecdote? Now, the reason I've used this is that there's a lot of negativity about AI. This is the, fear, uncertainty, doubt factor. Is it going to steal my ideas? Is it going to do this? Is it going to, remove the need for teachers and lecturers and all these sorts of things? And I don't believe the answer is yes. But I believe the answer is going to be, how are people going to adapt to this additional information, this additional context, the additional volume of information that we now have to read and assimilate to decide, is that me? If I, for example, if I'm speaking to Jackie, we've known each other probably, I guess, close on a year now. If I wrote something and posted it in an email or posted in a blog post and Jackie saw that, would she think that that was me speaking? As opposed to Peter took the lazy way and he asked ChatGPT a question. He just said, here's a blog post, look at this. And so I think there's still that human element, and there always will be that human element of trust. When I write something, and having been writing for many years, would people believe that that was my words, as opposed to how could he have quickly done that and claimed that it was his? So everybody now knows, because I published a book, everybody who knows that I published a book knows that that's my style. That's how I write. And even a very cynical mate of mine who's a journalist said that the book was very well written. He's published 4 or 5 books. So he knows about this stuff, and he looked at it and he said, it's very well written. He didn't know how much of it was ChatGPT and how much it was me, because he hadn't read anything I'd previously written. But we've been mates for 70 years. So he knows my thinking process. We're on different sides of the political spectrum. The one thing we don't talk about is politics. We talk about everything else, but we don't talk about politics, even though we're almost diametrically opposed in terms of our political leanings. So the answers to this question are also, again, in the PDF version of this, which we're happy to make available to anybody. But the question is, what's the real challenge for us? Are we really just going to say this is all going to hell in a handbasket because AI will take over everything? And the answer is no. AI will improve many things. If you look at the introduction of computers, you look at the introduction of the internet, mobile phones with text, look at all the scams and phishing things that go on with those. We all thought those were terrific at the beginning. Now we're worried about what governance is there to protect us from phishing scams, and ChatGPT is as bad as anything else if you give it the wrong context. So if you don't ask the right question, you don't give it the right context, the answer you get is not going to be correct. So what I'm really almost exhorting everybody to think about is go deep into the question. Don't be afraid to ask a second or a third or a fourth question. Don't be afraid to say, that really wasn't the answer I wanted. Can you think about it this way? Because I think you misunderstood what I said. Now, often you'll see an AI come back and say, I apologize for misunderstanding your context of your question. Here's what I think you really wanted to say. Is that correct? So again, in the presentation here, you've seen images. These were all generated by ChatGPT. When I generated the book 6 months ago, the quality was nowhere near as good as this. Now, when I first started generating these images, it gave me images because I'd said, I want something that I can use on a homepage on my website. So it gave me an image, which the image was great, but it then put little text things on there as though I was using it for a homepage. And of course, one of the things that AI tools are still not good at is generating images with text that's coherent. In other words, it will misspell words. It will, even if you said generative, it say genitive or something like that. It leaves characters out because it just doesn't understand the context. So I then have to say, I want you to generate another image and I want you to remove all text. So it did, and the ones that you see here, the text on the screen here that you're looking at in these images, I've put that on there. I've added that. So the text at the heading, the text on the right-hand side, I've added that. But the images themselves were generated by ChatGPT because I want to use these as the basis for a website which just focuses on my views on AI. So,
and interestingly, Peter, I think that's your thing about the to and fro with Perplexity or whatever the platform is. I've been using it quite a lot in discussions with clients about book titles and subtitles and the blurb for the back of the book, and about the authors. So we type these things in. And I recently did one for a book that's a political satire. So that was a new kind of topic area.
Yes.
And it came back with some really brilliant kind of reworks. And my client and I reworked ChatGPT's version and came up with something that we were really happy with.
Mm.
So part of me was a bit surprised. Part of me, my ego is a bit dented, but I've got to say I'm really enjoying that process of, as you've taught me, the whole engagement process, as opposed to asking it a question and then expecting a correct statement. My whole mindset around how I engage it is quite different. And I literally do talk to it or type into it like I'm talking to a
Yes,
person.
yes. And that's a key point, Jackie, that you don't treat it as an inanimate object. You treat it as having a conversation. When I was looking at building a new website, I thought, what am I going to call the website? What domain name would I like? Now, you can go to any of the domain name tools. You can say, oh, type in this. No, that's not available. Type in this. That's not available. I raised the question in ChatGPT and said, this is what I want the website to be about. These are the sort of things I want to talk about. Can you suggest a couple? Give me 10 suggestions for domain names. It came back with a few, and I then said, okay, of all of those, tell me which are available. So rather than me going one by one and saying, in a domain search engine, is this available? Yes, it is. No, it's not. It went through and it came back and said, yes, 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 no, 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 no.
Wow.
And so okay, of those three, do I do .com, .com.au, .au? What do I do? .ai, what am I going to do? It said, well, what's the focus of your website? What are you doing? Well, I said, it's me talking about AI. So the concept of the thinker in these slides here is that's my logo, right? So I said, I'm going to take part of that. It's going to be that person as a thinker sitting on a box saying, what does Peter think about AI? So it helped me do all of those things in literally 20 minutes. It meant that I could then go and register that domain, start building the content, not ready for publication yet, but it did that far quicker than I could have done it by going one step at a time. And I think as people think about how they use AI in any form, whether it's to improve their emails, to improve their writing, to publish a book, to generate websites, whatever it is, it can do things so much more quickly than you can. It can think at the speed of light, where I think at 75 years of age type things. It's like when I line up behind a golf ball, do I think I know where that's going? I've got no idea. No matter what I ask, it's always going to go right or left. So how I use it is I ask a series of questions. And even though in these three prompts, I've just asked this one question, if you look at the answers that it gave, you might then say, I can think of another 3 or 4 more questions. That you can even say to it, can you think of 3 or 4 more alternate approaches to how you answer this question? You can regenerate. You can do this any number of different times. And so I think that's the key thing, that you provide it the context, you treat it as a person, and you expect the answer to be given back to you as though you are being responded to by a person. And you're not afraid to question that person to say, I didn't really agree with that. Can you give me a rationalized view of why you said that? For me, the big difference in that last 6 months is that all of these AI tools are now looking at web content in real time. It's no longer, here's my training data as at the end of September 2021. It uses that. So, and I'll have to own up and say, I use the paid version of ChatGPT 4.0 and 4.0, the paid version of Perplexity, because that gives me the additional context of how I want to use it to answer questions. So I do a lot of research, which I never use, but it's good research for when I come back and say, I talked about this 3 months ago. I've now had another thought about how I might use that. I name all my chats, I number them so I can got some context. I then go back and look at those and say, I remember I talked about this. Can I go back and look at that? Now, one of the good and bad things about ChatGPT is that I can't get ChatGPT to go through my chat history and tell me what I talked about 6 months ago. That will come, I'm sure. It's like going through when you create a document, for example, you edit that 20 times. If you're on an online version, it keeps your version history. Right? So that's the sort of thing that you would want to be able to do. But take ownership of how you want to use the tool, and don't be afraid to challenge it to say, I didn't think that answer was very good. Can you give me a better answer if I give you some more context? It might say, what additional context would you like to give me? And I think that's the key, that you've got to keep challenging it in the way that you would a person. So I did a number of years as a university lecturer, had many smart asses saying to me, I don't believe that. I'd have to prove or justify why I thought that, or what the research said that formed the opinion that I gave that said, this is why I told you that was the answer. And even when we were doing presentation assessments, for example, I'd be the attack dog and I'd say, so you were given this task and you were given 4 students and you were expected to take 14 weeks to deliver this product. Here are the 3 points that you've completely missed. Why did you miss those? Now, if they'd had AI tools, they could have generated the code for that. I've used AI to generate code for some, again, as research, not because I want to write Python code, but I've said, show me how I could use Python code to generate a website which had this content and a yes button, a no button, and a subscribe button on it. And within 10 seconds, there's the code, run it through the Python translator, and that's a working website. So it depends on your background. It depends on your interest. I've used it in my coaching work, which I'm now not doing, but I've done a presentation to coaches to say it's the same thing. Your clients will be using AI tools. If you don't understand how they're using them, how are you going to know how to answer their questions?
Yeah, and I think, and I think, Peter, that's a really, it's partly what's prompting my discussions with you and getting in to learn deeper about it, because as a researcher and a writer, I'm keen to know how to use it more effectively and better, and also the pitfalls around it. I must say I'm having great fun using it for book titles, chapter titles. I guess some of the shorter type of aspects around writing a book. So not so much the writing of the book, but structure and content and blurbs and some of the leveraging of the content. I'm probably a bit like Gina and Catherine and others here. I kind of like the writing process. I don't really want it to take that over for me. And I'm kind of using it more as a tool to leverage what I've written, and maybe, help me kind of tweak some of it or get it sharper for particular purposes at this stage, rather than the actual, the art of writing in the first instance.
So I think before we got on the call, you were talking about you writing a book about Santos.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You speak to people in Santos, but where do you go to get your information? Where do you go to get the research for that?
Yeah, well, currently I do it in a very manual, old-fashioned way. I actually physically interview people, go through all their annual reports, any go and find publicly available material, as well as stuff that they've got in their archives. But I know where you're going with this, and yes, I should probably use AI to help me. So I've got got to get my act together there, I guess.
So I agree. The interviews are an important process. The archives and the history are an important process, but you might get 2 important snippets out of one question in an AI tool that will lead you down a different path in terms of the way you present that information. And I think that's the really interesting thing for me, is that I'll often ask one question, I'll end up going down a completely different path in the same chat because it gave me something that I hadn't thought would
Yeah.
be relevant until I saw it come back in that forum.
Interesting. Look, we're getting close up to 45 minutes. We could probably keep talking forever. If anybody has any questions that I'd like to ask Peter specifically, please type them in. Peter does have a presentation that we can happily share, and also he does have a book that's available. I'm trying to find my copy, but I keep giving it away, Peter, so I've got to go and buy some more. It's made a huge difference to how I've engaged with the AI tools, and I love them. You know, I'm not fearful of the tools. I still do have some concerns around scraping and IP and copyright protection, and I'm going to do a whole separate thing on to ebook or not and why you would or wouldn't. But I think in that regard, a lot of that is around just being super aware of what you're doing and why. In terms of the content you're making available in public arenas and what content that you actually want to gate somehow. But that's a whole nother topic altogether. Peter, have you got kind of anything I guess you'd like to cover off to maybe finish up?
Yes, there's I don't know the quote exactly, but there's some material recently presented about Albert Einstein's view on things that stop innovation. And one of those is bureaucracy and red tape. Now, we're at a point in the development of AI where we need some governance, but we don't need governance to the exclusion of innovation, creativity, and thought-provoking discussions. And I think that's what I'm most interested in, is that I certainly don't know everything about AI, nobody does, but the research I do says I can find more good things than bad things. I can find more reasons to be creative, to be innovative than I could before, because I can get that information in 10 seconds rather than 10 hours of research. I would no longer go to a library to research the McCarthyism era in the United States in the 1950s, for example. I would go to AI and I'd say, can you tell me about this? How does that impact the current political context of communism in China and South Korea and North Korea, for example? So it's that ability to think differently, to ask questions that may not be at the top of your mind when you're talking to somebody, but you can go and put them in, and all of a sudden you'll get some kind of response that may, inverted commas, may be useful and challenge you to think more deeply about how you would apply that to your own views on life, the universe, and everything, other than the answer of 42.
Yeah, well, the answer is always 42, and I think it's a really great way to kind of finish up. And I think, again, what you've opened my eyes to is that I see these tools as like having another smart person in the room, and I thoroughly enjoy actually the engagement with that virtual smart person in the room. And I kind of never thought I would, to be honest, because I'm really precious about my creativity and my writing. But I've only touched the surface, and I certainly can see how I can utilize it, and for my clients how we can use it to really question and sharpen up and have a look at things from a different perspective. So Peter,
I challenge anybody to use any computer technology today that doesn't have AI in it.
Yeah.
Everything you're doing has AI in it somewhere.
Yeah, I'm beginning to see that too, and including LinkedIn. You've got all these little prompts on LinkedIn that comes up, which I've noticed coming through. Peter, thank you so much again for your time today, and also for your terrific research in what you've done to prepare for today. We do have a download. If you'd like to receive one, just PM Peter or I. We're both on LinkedIn, and if you'd like to get this recording, let me know. And Peter's book is available on Amazon, and it's well worth purchasing. Again, if you go to Peter's profile on LinkedIn or his website, you can find it there. And if you get stuck, let me know, because I've got to go off and order another 2 or 3 already. So thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to attend, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.